What is it, good friends? It's Crim, and I hope you are all enjoying the pre-patch. However, in the background, Blizzard also released their latest beta build. I'm sure you remember last week's build where we had a ton of savage legendary nerfs, although Blizzard did say they may have went a bit too far. So in this week's build, there were a bunch of buffs to all of our legendaries, as well as some other class changes. This included a fix to the Assassination's version of Slice and Dice and makes it almost playable. Let's take a look. Let's start with the Assassination changes. The rank 2 Slice and Dice, which only Assassination gets, and used to give you extra attack speed on top of something that was already a quite substantial attack speed steroid, has been changed to now give you energy regen instead. Energy regen was an issue for Assassination in Shadowlands, and this particular change is one that had been suggested by a few players already, so it's great to see Blizzard take this feedback on board and then also make the change. It doesn't make Assassination super fast or anything, and it's still got other issues, but it's definitely a step in the right direction. Outlaw also saw a slight nerf to the instant activation damage of Blade Flurry, with its attack power coefficient being reduced to 40% down from 120. It is a small hit to Outlaw's AoE damage, but the core functionality of the subsequent spreading of damage through Blade Flurry has not been changed, so it's not super impactful. Subtlety also saw a nerf to its Enveloping Shadows talent. This, when combined with the Deepening Shadows passive, used to decrease the cooldown of your shadow dances by 2 seconds for every combo point spent, which has now been nerfed to 1.5 seconds. High shadow dance uptime was one of the power points of Subtlety in Shadowlands, and this particular nerf was pretty reasonable, doesn't reduce Subtlety's power level too much, but is again a step in the right direction. Next, let's get into the legendary buffs, and almost every single rogue legendary saw a buff in one way or another. For the neutral legendaries, the Invigorating Shadow Dust nerf from last week was reverted, and it now once again reduces the cooldowns on all of your abilities by 15 seconds rather than 10. The Mark of the Master Assassin legendary had its crit bonus damage duration increased to 4 seconds up from 2. Closer to the original 5, but this is still a decent buff. The Tiny Toxic Blades legendary saw a complete rework, and rather than spreading bleeds and poisons when using Shiv now, it instead increases the damage of Shiv massively and also removes its energy cost. This will probably only really see play in Assassination if at all. The Bloodfang neutral legendary had its healing bonus reduced to 50% down from 100, and it also saw a change to its attack power coefficient, though this wasn't reflected in the patch notes on Wowhead. The previous attack power coefficient was 7.7%, which has now been increased to 95% on the beta, which makes this legendary incredibly overpowered. It is probably a decimal point gone wrong, so it was meant to be 9.5% instead, so I'll probably expect this to be fixed in the next build or even hotfixed. Assassination saw buffs to all 4 of its legendaries, with the Dashing Scoundrel legendary power having its poison crit chance increased to 15% up from 8. The energy regen remains untouched, so it's not as good as what it used to be, but it's still pretty decent. The Doomblade legendary power had its Mutilate Bleed effect increased to 30% up from 20, and Zodic's Insignia had its change from last week reverted and is now also back up to a 30% damage increase up from 20. All 3 of these legendaries are within 1% of one another, so depending on the situation you can probably pick whichever one you want. The Dustwalker's patch also saw a change, and it now reduces the cooldown of your Vendetta for every 50 energy you spend rather than 65, a small buff. However, this legendary is only really going to be good if you can still sync up Vendetta with Vanish, and the only situation in which this would happen is if the cooldown of your Vendetta is cut in half by this legendary. This would mean you could sync up Vendetta with Vanish, then have another Vendetta a minute later, and it would be back up again to sync with the next Vanish. There is a chance that this will be possible with some raid gear, but we'll have to wait and see how this turns out. Outlaw also saw buffs to all 4 of its legendaries, and the Celerity's legendary power damage bonus while in Adrenaline Rush got increased to 10% up from 5, making it currently the best simming legendary for Outlaw. Concealed Blunderbuss's proc chance was increased to 40% up from 30, which also makes it pretty competitive. Greenskin's Wicker's change from last week was also reverted, so the damage of your next pistol shot is once again increased by 200% after using Between the Eyes, up from 120%. And everyone's favorite combat legendary Guile's Charm had its max damage bonus increased to 10% up from 8, which unfortunately still leaves it quite underwhelming. And even Subtlety had its fair share of buffs. The ever-popular Akari's Soul Fragment, after having been battered by nerfs over the last month or so, most of them well deserved, finally saw its first buff, and its second Shadow Strike now deals 25% damage up from 15%. This makes it once again the best simming single target legendary, though by a far smaller margin than its previous iterations. However, the next best legendary and the far more versatile one by far is Finality, and that also saw a 5% buff to its finisher damage. This means that probably on anything but pure single target, Finality is going to be the go-to choice at the moment. Deathly Shadows had its damage amp effect after using Vanish increased from 8 seconds up to 12 seconds. Unfortunately, this still does not make it particularly good, but it's a nice little buff. The Rotten, on the other hand, saw a rework. Rather than your next couple of Shadow Strikes, Backstabs or Gloomblades given extra combo points, it now just works for the single next Shadow Strike, Gloomblade or Backstab and increases its damage by 30% instead and adding an extra 4 combo points. This is also not a particularly huge buff and the Rotten is still quite underwhelming. So where, after all this is said and done, does this leave the rogue specs in Shadowlands beta at the moment? For single target, Subtlety is still going to be the go-to choice, with Outlaw lagging a bit further behind and Assassination lower still. In Mythic Plus, both Subtlety and Outlaw can be good. It's going to depend on the type of pulls you do, the type of dungeon, etc. And again, Assassination is behind still. I'm really hoping we're going to see some buffs to the spec in one way or another in the near future. And with that, you are once again up to date with the latest beta build and all things rogue. If you haven't subscribed already, I would very much appreciate it if you did, and leave a like if you enjoyed the video. If you have any questions or comments or whatever else you can think of, leave them down below, or come chat to me in my stream, twitch.tv/Crimwell. I hope you guys have a lovely weekend, a great day, and I'll see you in the next video.